Well, hello and welcome to this episode of About Time with me, Chris Nichols. This is the series where I talk to people who've influenced me, inspired me, impacted me in some ways when our paths have crossed over the last 25 years. Some of them are people I have known for ages and ages and have worked with, and some of them are much more recent folks whose stories have really inspired me in some way. And one of those is Steve Clark, who I'm delighted to introduce today. So, Steve, welcome.
Hi, Chris. I do, having listened to some of the series already, I do feel like a latecomer.
Yes, you're in series one though. We're 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 working on series. We've got series two is booked up and series three is in pre-production. So we're.
Brilliant. It's a lovely series. It's really great fun to listen
No,
to.
I'm glad you're here, Steve. We met actually recently. I mean, we were both at Anthropy, which is a thing that happened at the Eden Project. But why don't you say something about your recollection of how we met? I'll tell you where I'd start on it though. For me, you were on a panel on day one, and it blew me away. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and I thought, I need to know this guy. That's why we connected.
Bless. Thank you ever so much, Chris. It was, I mean, Anthropy itself it was my first time at Anthropy. I think you'd been to it before.
No, I'd been connected to it, but I hadn't actually got there, so I was my first time too.
We were both Anthropy virgins, as it
Yes.
were, so that's good. So, Anthropy is this amazing meeting of all sorts of people from not just healthcare, which is my normal area. It's from all areas of business, of voluntary sector, of youngsters that are entering into the world effectively. You know, you've got some teenagers there, and seasoned pros like you and me, leaders of industry, all coming together with a view of the future of Britain and in the wonderful setting of the Eden Project. So it was an amazing place to be.
And I think a big shout out there to John O'Brien and the Anthropy team for organising it, because it is a spectacularly organised thing, and to Tim Smith for hosting it, because again, it's a
Absolutely.
beautiful, amazing bit of hosting. But yeah,
It,
Steve,
it's,
I
it, it
interrupted you.
is incredible. I was invited there by a consultancy group called Adelphi, who are based up in Manchester, but they work all over the world. In the healthcare sector, they do real world evidence and publications and that sort of thing. And they've had a connection to Anthropy since it first started. And they hosted this panel discussion that you came along to, which was looking at the future of health, preventing disease in the future, how we approach it, etc. And I was privileged to be on a panel alongside people from the pharmaceutical industry, other people from the charity sector, a leader in healthcare provision, runs the Manchester Health Authority, and it was an incredible panel to talk about this. And we had it was one of those things where if we'd had another hour, I think we still would have been scratching the surface. But it was a phenomenal topic that Adelphi hosted there. And one of the great things for me was it got us to speak to one another. Because straight afterwards, he made contact with me, I think through LinkedIn. And we managed to, after a lot of trying to get our diaries for the couple of days sorted out, we managed to sit together for a coffee outside one of the domes at the Eden Project, which is a lovely place to be able to meet somebody, isn't it?
It is,
And we found we just connected, so we got chatting and kept chatting.
and I mean there are so many aspects to your story. I don't want to reduce you to one category, but where would you like to start?
I guess how I got to Strive for Five. So Strive for Five is the not-for-profit that I run,
Yeah, and,
and
and
so
can I just
I
say, I
talk
mean,
about
I have,
delivering.
I have, Steve, mentioned this in the kind of the introduction to this, and it's in the written blurb that we're putting out with this, because I think I had never heard of this organisation or never heard of such a thing until I met you, and I thought, well, it's brilliant, it's really, really good. So please do tell people, because people won't know what it is. What is it?
Absolutely. Well, Strive for Five happened by accident. It wasn't one of those things. What it does now is it's a website and social media presence that aims to bring hope to people with stage four cancer. So it shares positive stories and experiences around it. I'm able to give support to people that are going through their advanced cancer journey. So stage four is the most advanced form of cancer. Um, but I campaign for improvements in healthcare, and I do some fundraising for some of the cancer charities. I should say that Strive for Five itself is funded completely by me, so I don't do any fundraising for it. It's something that I run, and it is just me. But it has a global footprint, so the website literally all over the world. I get hits from there, and I've got a few thousand followers on different platforms. But through it and other groups I'm involved in, I've been privileged to be able to help and support thousands of patients going through their advanced cancer experiences. But what got me to that, and how Strive for Five came about, is that I mean, my background is I'm a biochemist by training. I worked for the NHS for 7 years, moved into the pharmaceutical industry, have experience in UK and global business management, set up as a freelance consultant. So I've been doing strategy work for the pharmaceutical industry for a long time. And up until 10 years ago, super fit, sort of 10K runner, mixed martial artist, yogi, really, really healthy. And what is now 12 years ago, as of last weekend, I was diagnosed with stage 4 colorectal cancer, bowel cancer. Came out of the blue, had almost no symptoms, and got the diagnosis. A very brief part of this will be the story of that. So I was diagnosed with a spread that had already gone to my liver and both lungs. Um, I luckily had private healthcare, so it meant that I got a private room for my long stays in hospital. I got an ensuite bathroom and that sort of thing. So there were privileges to that. Um, but I got excellent care, and I've been very lucky. I had access to all the right treatments, and because of the great care that I've had, I managed to get on top of it. So the prognosis at diagnosis. Sorry, go on, Chris.
No,
Go on,
can I
Chris.
just say, so you were in Manchester at the time, were you? So was that the Christie? I just happen to know that Christie is very good for cancer.
You're absolutely right. The Christie is one of the top centres. I wasn't in Manchester. I was actually down around here. I was living in Maidenhead, and so all my care was in that geographical area. And the treatment, I went through the standard approaches. So I had chemotherapy. I had to have surgery urgently because the primary tumor in my bowel was very large, and so it was almost obstructing. So I had a very large tumor removed from an excellent surgeon who's who works in the NHS, and he did a wonderful job on me. Um, and then I moved over to being looked after by a great oncologist who works out of Imperial in London. And I managed to, instead of getting ready to have more surgery on my lungs, I was very lucky that the chemotherapy worked so well that surgery was cancelled because it wasn't necessary.
And
So
never became necessary.
it never became necessary in that period. So I did have a recurrence later that needed what's called ablation. But so I had 6 months of intense chemo, and that got me on top of things. And I then moved into maintenance chemo, so long-term chemo. So in total, I was on chemotherapy until a year ago, so 11 years of chemotherapy. And through that, I'm here today. I'm able to do great things. I travel all over the world, etc. So one of the phrases I say is a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer doesn't have to mean the end of your life. It can be the reason to start living it. And it is one of those things where you come through something like that
That is such a
and you
brilliant
really
phrase. I think you need to say it again for people.
sure. It's a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer doesn't have to mean the end of your life. It can be the reason to start living it. And,
Fantastic.
and it's something I truly believe in. And there's a number of things that I've written, but that's the one that I think really resonates for me. And so when I started on the two types of the various types of chemotherapy. People say, "Oh, chemotherapy, it's the same thing." There are lots of different drugs, obviously, but there's different approaches as well. So you can get chemotherapy before surgery to shrink the tumor. If you've got earlier stages, you can get chemotherapy after surgery to mop things up. Or in my case, for example, you have what's called intense chemotherapy. So you have 6 months of really high dose chemo, as hard as you can take it. And the idea being to clear your system as much as it can be. And so I had intense chemotherapy. And then I moved on to what would sometimes be called palliative chemotherapy. So non curative, but the idea was to control it. And so that was on the January of 2014. And I got some side effects that I wasn't expecting. So I joined an online forum, patient forum, by the charity Beating Bowel Cancer. It's now called Bowel Cancer UK. And it's a great group of patients that help and support one another. And through that, I started to see inequalities in the system, and also I realised how little there was written about stage 4 cancer. So, and anything that you did find about stage 4 was really quite negative. It was bad experience. It was all that, you're going to die and you're going to die soon. The stats when I was diagnosed were really bleak. So I had about a 45% chance of surviving my first year. I had between a 4 and 7% chance of surviving to 5 years. And there weren't and still aren't any stats for 10-year survival with my diagnosis. So things looked bleak in that respect. But I have a belief that the mindset that you bring to anything in life can make a difference. I don't know, it's that thing of a positive approach to things, or as positive as you can be, can make a difference. It can really, really help. My chemo nurse said that intense chemotherapy that I had, the great results I got from it, she reckoned half of those results came from the chemo and half of it came from the approach. But what I saw was, as I was looking at all the different people on the forum that were being treated with advanced cancer, when it came to that story, how people would be approaching their disease, it was a real mixture, and a lot of that came from the care that they were given. And that's not to say they were getting bad care, but it was not necessarily well communicated. So what happens is then that patients come to the patient forums wanting support to interpret what they've been told by the doctors. So that's when I started my journey into advocacy and support and that sort of thing. So as I went through several years doing that sort of thing, I then was approaching my 5-year mark. And I'd always said, the joke that I said to my friends was that I was aiming for 5 years, hoping for 10, and budgeting for 20. So that was the approach I was taking to it. And obviously, every year when I was seeing my oncologist, every year I'd say, okay, prognosis, and he'd always say, and I can't see beyond another year, 18 months. And but let's see where we can push it. So then, as I was approaching 5 years, the reason I talk about 5 years so much is that the 5-year survival is a very important measure that they use in cancer care. So across all cancers and all the studies, you talk about 1 year and 5-year survivals. And so 5 is the big magic number. And so the idea of setting up Strive for 5 was just to chart my journey to 5 years, to say to other people with stage 4 cancer, it happens. This isn't a dream thing. It happened. So it was me getting towards 5 years, how I was living it, and how I was celebrating.
That's brilliant. Because actually you clarified something for me, because I didn't ask you this before. I imagined that Strive for 5 was like stage 5, which is this like renewal.
Mm, mm. Oh, that'd be good. I like that
that's
idea.
What I see in you. I see you like in this.
Yeah.
Yes, stage 4, and you have done so much. Yeah, so maybe there's a stage 5. Who knows? Yeah.
That could be it. I like that. Thank you. I may steal that.
It's all yours. You can't steal it. It's yours.
Thank you. But the idea was that Strive for 5 would be around for about a year or so. But the feedback that I got was really powerful. So I'd be going to different patient events, and I'd be meeting with people, and they'd say, oh, "You're Strive for 5." And there's a guy called Patrick and his wife who I remember, he sadly passed now, but I remember meeting him up in Birmingham at an event, and he came up and brought his wife over, and they said that when he was diagnosed, the Strive for 5 website was the first positive thing he found about stage 4.
Right.
And it helped him to feel that there was hope. And I had a number of that sort of communication from people over that period of a year, that I realised that actually it wasn't a 1-year project anymore, and it wasn't about me. So Strive for 5 then evolved into more what it is now, which is a website which has lots of tools on it about the fact that there is hope. And I'm not sorry. I'm not saying to people you will live to 5 years, 10 years, etc. But it's approached with more cautious optimism. Get on your front foot because it does happen. Sorry, Chris, you were
Yeah.
going to ask me
Well, I
something
was
before.
going to say, you know, um, you've described going into or encountering a very bleak situation that a lot of people would go, well, there's nothing I can do. They're just going to do stuff to me now, with a very different mindset to that. And I just wondered, where does that come from?
Well, actually, it's a really really important question. I think that's if we rewind back to like the day of diagnosis and that, so we talk about that part of the journey. Um, I mentioned that I've been very lucky in the care that I've had. One of the areas was that, so I was diagnosed by a gastroenterologist, so I had to have a colonoscopy, and after that he then sent me for a scan, and they did the biopsies and all that sort of thing on it. When he gave me the results, which was on a Friday at 12 o'clock, I still remember it. Um, I wasn't expecting cancer. I was expecting something like diverticulitis, ulcerative colitis. Those were the symptoms that I had.
Yeah.
And I do remember him saying to me that he and his team that had seen me that week hadn't seen me as a cancer patient, and that they were shocked by the results as well. But he told me, so the words that you never want to hear, he sat down in front of me and he said, Steve, I'm really sorry, all of your results have come back, and I'm afraid to say it is cancer. So I was like, okay, first, so that was the first, oh no. And then he said, and I'm sorry to say, it's spread to your liver and both lungs. And now I'm of an age, similar age to yourself. I mean, this is celebrating your 65th. I'm 60, 61 now. If you have cancer that's, in my mind, if you have cancer that's spread to other parts of your body, that's pretty much it. Game over. So that was my thought process then. And so I went into shock and a bit of a shutdown. But where things worked, and this is where you and I have spoken about this, that communication between doctors and patients is really, really important. I still remember him saying and repeating, so he made sure it went in. We're going to do our best for you. We've already met as a team. We've got a treatment plan in place. We're going to be really aggressive. You're fit and healthy other than this. We're going to give you the best chance we possibly can. And that was such a strong communication. That didn't, I wouldn't say that immediately lifted me, but it went in there.
Yeah.
And it mulled around in there, and so I wasn't that aware of it. Um, I then had to get home, so I was at a hospital about 40 minutes drive away from my house, and I have never focused so much on every individual factor of driving, how I was holding the steering wheel, where the gear stick was, everything that was around me, because I had it's practicing mindfulness, which I know you've spoken about in some of the other podcasts. So I was absolutely practicing mindfulness to allow me to get home. And then when I got home, I collapsed and howled and wailed, and it was guttural. The different aspects of my personality, it makes me sound crazy when I say this bit of the story, but the very British bloke in me I can remember the thoughts of, oh, for God's sakes, pull yourself together. Crying isn't going to help anything. I mentioned that I was quite fit and I was into yoga and meditation, etc. So the more yogic and aware me was going, you've got to process this, you've got to let it out. And I sort of saw myself from a helicopter view with these two caricatures of the British me, British bloke, and the enlightened me on the shoulders talking at me, and I found that quite funny. And I remember ending up laughing at myself because of how I was
And,
dealing with it.
and this is like
The
on the
day
day
of
or very
diagnosis.
close to diagnosis. Yeah.
Yeah, this was a matter of a couple of hours after being diagnosed. Yeah, but I found myself but I realised that I've got to deal with it. I've got to work through it. What am I going to do about it? It so happened that then, because of the size of the primary, I then had a phone call from the surgeon, and then I had to drive to the hospital again to see him because I was going to be operated on within a few days.
Same day. This is also.
That same day.
Wow.
That same
Okay.
day.
Yeah.
But that's how. Well, the size, generally speaking, the size of a bowel cancer tumor, a colorectal tumor, is between a 20p piece and a 50p piece, so yay big. Mine was just over 20 centimeters long and 6.5 centimeters wide.
Right.
The day after my operation, my surgeon came in and said, words that you never want to hear about your own body. He said, picture a large German sausage. And so that was great. They've taken that out. Um, but going back to the day of diagnosis, I then realized, because I'd only got a few days before the operation, I'd got to start telling people. I didn't have time to wallow. I had to do things because I realized very quickly it's not just about me. But I realized very quickly that I needed to tell people because I needed help. And so I sent very careful messages to people I need to speak to, not to say, "Can you call me urgently?" Because Friday afternoon, you don't normally get a message from somebody saying, "Give me a call." So I was trying to be careful and trying to say things like, "If you're driving, don't worry about it. I'll speak to you later." Because I didn't want to be telling them this news while they were in a car on a motorway, for example. But I had to tell various people. The initial conversations I had, I couldn't say the word cancer. It choked in my throat, and it just shows the effect that these things can have. But it made me work through it.
Yeah.
And one of my very good friends, Tracy, said that she and her husband would come down from Lancaster. That we'll come down, we'll join you. It was a bank holiday weekend. I said, "Don't put yourself out. Don't be silly. Don't put yourself out." And she was really good because she gently mentioned it again and then sent me a few texts afterwards. At which point I realized that it isn't only about me. I was on a journey with other people. And I was very lucky to realize this quite early. And so then over that weekend, I had a number of friends come and visit and stay with me for a couple of days to help me get through that initial point. And I learned to speak about it. And I learned to ask for help. And that was really critical because, again, the typical way that I would have dealt with things is just get on and do it.
Mm-hmm.
And it wouldn't, I simply couldn't have.
Yeah.
And so learning to ask for help was, as a bloke, was a really big step.
There are so many connections between what you're saying and the other um, podcasts in series one, and I'm delighted you've had a look at some of them. But one of them you haven't had a look at, but there is a link to, is the one I'm going to do next, which I'm going to do to close the series off with Philippa Hardman, my business partner and colleague, where we're going to reflect on The Salt Path, the film,
Oh, yes, sir.
and the Rain and Wind book, because in 2016, to get over a trauma, I walked the Southwest Coast Path as a long, silent walk. And in the film, which I saw yesterday, there's a scene, I've no idea if this is purely fictional or if this is how it actually happened, but the doctor, in a caring sort of way, was absolutely brutal with the diagnosis of this guy, Moth Wynn, when, he said, "I can explain the diagnosis and we can give you end-of-life care." And that was kind of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I imagine a version of that in some way happens for quite a lot of people with a cancer diagnosis. And yours wasn't handled that way, and it sounds like it made a huge difference. And I know that you have a large interest in language and the way language is used around disease, and particularly you were, when we sat outside the Eden Project, we talked about palliative care and hospicing, and there was a lot of crackling energy around that, and you said, "Oh yeah, we have to talk about that." So we're at 23 minutes and we have to talk about that. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, so
Thank you. Yes,
yeah,
it's and you're absolutely right. And I think that I haven't seen that film, but I will look it up because you're quite right. What often happens? So I will say, before I say this isn't. I'm not bashing doctors.
no,
Oncologists and the teams that we have around cancer do an incredible job and are achieving huge results. Cancer survival is increasing. The incidence is increasing phenomenally quickly, but we are across most cancers improving the survival, and that's really, really important. One of the things that comes out of that is that no longer is it a case of you're going to live or die quite quickly. And so oncology care has to evolve. So the way that doctors speak to patients at diagnosis, that example of, you know, a typical thing which I hear about all over the place is, "I've been told I'm incurable. I've been told I'm inoperable. Now, the incurable thing, there's pretty much only one disease where at diagnosis we will label a patient and communicate to the patient that they consider to be either curable or incurable. Across almost all of medicine, we don't cure people. We help to manage and control the disease. But it's only cancer where we label somebody as being incurable. And I think that's something that's got to change now. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when oncology specialty only set up in the 1970s, 1980s, so it's a relatively new science. It was correct then, because literally, if you got advanced cancer, either they were going to be able to take out all the bits and very quickly cure you, or you were going to die relatively quickly. But now, more and more people are doing what I'm doing, living long and active and full lives with advanced cancer. So I still count myself as a cancer patient, as having stage 4 cancer, even though I'm now 12 years down the line. And I think it's important because that changes how someone looks at themselves. The day of the diagnosis, being told you've got cancer is hard enough. Being told you've got cancer and you're incurable, it is like a death sentence. And the story that you did, that walking on the beach thing in that film is a really good example of it. Is being told that, how are you going to cope with it? Being told that you're inoperable. For a patient, that means that's it, they can't operate on me. From a surgeon's point of view, they generally mean can't operate on you at the moment because of these various complicating factors. However, down the line that may change. I did a talk to an audience of oncologists and specialist colorectal surgeons about 7 years ago now, and I highlighted this. And the chair of the meeting, who was about to become the president of the society, wrote to me the day afterwards, emailed me to say thanks for the talk. Said I was in clinic this morning, and I was about to go into my inoperable spiel, caught myself, heard your voice, and changed what I was going to say, and the outcome of the consultation was totally different. And I've heard this from a lot of doctors that have listened to my talks. And so what I really want to do is to change the way that in oncology, doctors talk to patients, the language they use, the tone that they use. A typical thing is that because doctors understandably don't want to give patients false hope, they can't say to everybody with advanced cancer, we're going to cure you. That would be wrong. However, they've tended in this era of full disclosure, which is quite right, they've tended to now go so far down the other way that they end up being pessimistic. And I hear that from lots and lots of patients where, they said, I've just seen my oncologist and my will to live has gone. And it's like they've taken everything away from me. And actually, just by a slight rephrasing, a slight change of tone, a little change of the words that are used, actually you can get a lot more out of it. And where that's developed to now is, have you heard of the nocebo effect by any chance?
Heard of, but I couldn't explain it to people, so perhaps you should explain it.
Happy to. It's almost everybody's heard of the placebo effect. The placebo effect, you factor into many of the big studies. It's where if you think something is going to do good for you, if you think something is going to work for you, going to make you feel better, it's more likely to do so. And so, you give in a lot of the big studies, there's a control group which are given a placebo, which is a nothing tablet. And that is often found to have a 10, 15, or even 20% response rate, according to the different diseases. So that is in effect is the evidence that having a positive mindset towards your treatment will make a difference, because that's exactly the positivity thing has come back to you. The opposite is true, and that is the nocebo effect, which isn't talked about very much in medicine. I'm trying to get that talked about more. The nocebo effect is if you think something is going to harm you or something isn't going to work, then you're more likely to not get success. So the same is true about how you approach your disease in general. So if you immediately think, I've got an advanced cancer that is going to beat me, this is going to kill me, immediately you're starting at a negative position. So what I'm talking about here is how can we help patients to get the most out of things? And so how you approach your disease, it's like I'm going to take this on, I'm going to do my best with it. So if you want to talk about it being a fight or a battle, if that's what works for you, You can do that however you want to approach it. Not, for many people, the battle approach, the fight approach doesn't work. For some, they see themselves as a warrior.
Mm-hmm.
Great. If that works for them, it's that mindset thing. But the approach to treatment, when you're talking about chemotherapy, all of the communication that you get from healthcare professionals is about side effects. They don't ever, or very, very rarely, will they sit down and say, the reason why I think this particular treatment or this regimen will be right for you is because this is what the data says, or I've seen in people like you, this is the treatment that I've seen get the best results. That sort of, so it's a really simple little bit of communication. Give them some positive, give them the negative, explain that yes, there are risks around it, and here are some tips for overcoming some of those side effects. But if you only give that, you're only going to get a negative, and that's where you get the nocebo effect. And I'll give you a case study, which is me. So bear in mind, my background when I went into it, I'd been working in healthcare for about 30 years at that point, both in the NHS and in the pharmaceutical industry. I'd worked with global experts in the different diseases, top professors. So I know about communication, I know about medicines. Um, the the only bit of my care where I'd say there was a particular problem was when it came to my treatment, and my oncologist knows this because he sat in the audience when I told this story, and luckily he does just different now. He gave me printouts from the Macmillan website of the patient information leaflets of all the different drugs he was going to put me on.
Oh, yeah.
Now, the patient information leaflet is a regulatory document that has no value for a patient whatsoever. It achieves a regulatory commitment, and that's all. And it just lists out all the side effects. And I can remember saying to him, I said, I don't want any of these. In fact, not with this. So I went into my first chemo session, which was 8 hours in the chair, and I left the hospital with a bottle of chemo attached to me for 2 days. I left there so tired. A friend of mine had to drive me home, and I went straight to bed and straight to sleep. And I just about managed to wake up to have a bit of dinner with a friend that had come round. I was wiped out. The next day, I felt really horrible. I got up, and I can remember sitting downstairs on the sofa, feeling really nauseous, really, really ill, feeling as though I was going to be sick. And I can remember thinking, "This is it. You knew this was going to happen. This was everything you've been expecting. Chemo is horrible. This is what it's going to do to you. Oh my God!" And again, I heard myself. I heard myself thinking. I thought, "Hang on a minute. Am I doing this?" I mean, there's no doubt chemo can cause nausea and vomiting. There's no question on that. I'm not saying this is all for everybody. It's the case, but I caught myself in that mindset,
Yeah.
and I thought, "Hang on a minute." And so I quickly got one of the booklets out. So what to do if you feel sick? One of the tips was don't lie down, because if you feel poorly, your natural thing is you lie down, you curl up into a fetal position.
Yeah.
And if you think about your body position, then that's going to make, if you're feeling nauseous, you're going to be sick. So sit upright, or ideally walk around a bit. Have a bit of water, or if you can, a bit of tea, and if you can stomach it, a bit of toast. I did that, and I started to feel better,
It's a
and realised that I'd created the side effect.
It's a brilliant example of what Michael Chaskalson talked about in an earlier podcast in his series, where he was talking about meta-awareness or metacognition,
Yeah.
which is catching yourself thinking what you're thinking while you're thinking it,
Yes.
and being interested in why, and then being able to break that loop, change that pattern. Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. And that's why I think the communication that goes around, the support that goes around a cancer diagnosis per se, but especially an advanced cancer diagnosis, if we can help doctors to be able to communicate better with their patients at that early phase of the patient's journey, you can help them to get onto the front foot and to then get more out of their treatment. And that's one of the things I really do campaign for that.
Yeah. And I mean, that's brilliant. And that's only part of what you said to me about Outside Eden, because you also said, you had a real problem with the language around palliative care and it getting collapsed to mean end of life or hospice. And they're three different things.
Absolutely. And it is, again, it's one of those areas where it's in cancer that we talk primarily that we talk about receiving palliative care. Um, Whereas most medical treatments, most medicines that you're given are palliative care.
Hmm.
The definition of
I'm
palliative
on it
care.
myself for my heart things.
There you
That's,
go.
oh, I've hit
Yeah.
the microphone. That's palliative care. You know,
But did your doctor say I'm going to put you on palliative care?
it absolutely did not. No.
Exactly, and that's the thing. So diabetes, hypertension, etc. We'll put you on this to control it, to help you manage it, etc. We don't label it as palliative care, and so I don't know why it is that in cancer we need to put that label on, because the public perception is palliative care equals end of life care, and so when you're told you're being referred to a palliative care specialist, which actually you can be on palliative care for years and years and years with a palliative care specialist. You can be under hospice care for a long time, but it's only cancer where we insist on this label. And again, I think that's something where we should be moving on from that now.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, because of your, you know, what you said to me about outside Eden, my daughter, who is a palliative care nurse and has worked in St Christopher's Hospice and these days is on community palliative care work, is working with a linguist at a university doing some research on. You would think that the language around hospicing and palliative care would be positive because, as Gemma says, when you go into a hospice, they're incredibly positive places. The language, the way the language gets coded is entirely negative. And they're actually looking at how does this come about? There's something weird going on that's not quite understood yet.
And it's so this sort of project. I'm delighted to hear that she's working on it. And I think we emailed about it in one of our messages back and forth. I think it's a great initiative and has far-reaching impact beyond that specific hospice. I think we have to do. There's so much that we can do around this. But the thing I found quite interesting, as I've been doing all of this work, most doctors, bear in mind that they do thousands of consultations a year. Most doctors aren't taught communication skills. And for somebody like yourself that's a communicator, that's probably quite a big shock. And I found it amazing. When I did that first talk to that big audience of oncologists and surgeons, a senior registrar, so a very senior doctor, came to me afterwards, and he's the one that said, the only training I've had on language to use with patients is what you've just presented to me. And he said, and I've never seen someone being told that they've got cancer. The first time that I see someone being told they've got cancer is when I'll be telling them. And he was an oncologist, a senior registrar. And we've got to move beyond that. There is more work being done now. I'm really pleased to say there are places that are stuck to work on this. There's a wonderful centre in Brighton. Professor Leslie Fallowfield is doing some great work there. But it's got to become the norm. It's talking about this centre is doing this or this place is doing this good thing. It's got to become standard. And that will make such a difference to the individuals. And again, this is where I'm privileged to speak, not just from my perspective, but from thousands of patients that I've helped and supported over the years. And it's what I've seen. It will help to get people onto their front foot with their treatment, and that just makes such a difference.
I have one more question to ask. Yesterday or a couple of days ago, I was interviewing Helena Clayton, who is an organisation consultant whose work is around love in organisations, and a lot of that, when I said, well, what is that? What does that really look like? And it's around compassion and caring conversations, lots more things. But I'm hearing the same here, but without the word love. And I'm just wondering, is love in there somewhere?
Love can be, but I think to be as well, I've got to be very fair to the doctors. Doctors have to protect themselves as well, so they have to keep a little bit of distance. So I think that maybe love is part of the ongoing care.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I think from a doctor's point of view, that would be a step too far for them to be able to do that. They have to keep that little bit of distance away. So caring and compassion, definitely. But maybe for the specialist nurses, maybe love can be part of the care program there.
Steve, we're just about at 40 minutes. But I
Wow.
do want to say, so what next? What are you doing next in this work? I think we'd just like to know
Well,
a little bit more.
on a personal note, my next thing in 1 hour and 15 minutes, I get the results of my latest CT scan. So the nerves are a little bit on there. And apart from that, I've got a number of publications that I'm working on. There's one about integrating. So I'm very keen on helping to integrate patients into the solution. So um, clinical studies should be set up with patients helping to set them up. You know what they're looking at, how the trial is being done. All health provision for patients should be designed in collaboration with patients, but it's generally not. So trying to get more of that. There's a group called the International Society of Patient Engagement Professionals, which is that a lot of health organisations now have what they call patient engagement specialists. And so trying to get that to become the norm again. So that actually working with patients on designing solutions for patients. So that's a lot of the rest of it. And continuing to try and give hope to my fellow patients and give them the lift.
Brilliant. Steve, thank you. I'm just going to say, well, first of all, yet another heap of connections. A little bit later in the summer, on series 2 or 3, we have John Alexander coming, who runs the New Citizens Project. And his book, Citizens, subtitle, How the Solution to Everything is All of Us, is so connected to your work. Don't do anything without involving the people. Don't do anything without involving the people. So I will make sure that when we publish that, we'll make links backwards and forwards to yours, to how it relates to John's, how it relates to Michael's, how it relates to Jeff Mead's on changing the story. There's so many connections. So I'm just going to say goodbye to the listeners, and I'm going to come back and thank you properly. So thank you, everybody, for listening to this edition of About Time. This is part of Series 1. We're putting up a full list of all the episodes in this first week of June. So thank you for listening. Look out for other episodes. Meanwhile, Steve, thank you so much, Steve Clark, for being with us. It's been absolutely brilliant to meet you and to have you here. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now, and the very best of luck with the next set of results. Thank you. Bye-bye.